because I don't want to go backwards. I want to keep going forward. Together, that's exactly where we're going to go. God bless.
I'm Claudia Looze.
And I'm Shawn Johnson.
Welcome to Rewind, the week of July 13th through the 17th. What a week for Steve Walters and JR to take off.
Yeah.
So much has been happening. So I have a few questions for you, Shawn. Let's start with the budget was signed. So let's just give an overview of what's in, what's out, what did he veto?
It seems so long ago, so much has happened. I think the biggest veto, everybody seemed to agree, was this veto of the payday lender provision that would have let payday lenders offer more than just payday loans. You had a variety of financial services that they would have been allowed to offer. This was one of those items that was added to the budget in the Joint Finance Committee process at the very last minute. No debate, nobody saying why this is a good idea. So the governor took that out. As far as other vetoes go, there were kind of smaller ones here or there where the legislature wanted to have more authority over maybe an audit or a pot of money through the Joint Finance Committee, where he struck that out. It's pretty typical for governors. I think by and large, the budget that he signed is mostly similar to the one that he introduced. Legislators made some key changes, they would say, along the way. Republicans did when it comes to school funding, but the highlights are kind of the same now as they were then.
Okay, and let's go through a few of those things, like school funding. Let's start with K12 and then move to UW.
Yeah, K12 funding, the governor introduced a budget that would have cut funding in the first year of the budget, added funding in the second year of the budget. That was really pushed back on in the public hearings of the budget. Lawmakers said from the get-go they didn't want that, and so the legislature did add funding back to the first year of that budget. And so that's probably what they would say was their biggest change or their most substantial change to this. The catch is that the way that they changed the voucher school funding formula, because there's a big expansion of vouchers in this budget, voucher schools would begin slowly kind of siphoning away general state aid dollars that were going to go to public schools under this budget. And so, the budget in the first year, it might be technically flat, but some schools are going to see a decrease.
Okay, and then move on to UW system. What happened there?
The UW system, the governor proposed a $300 million cut. They still got cut. I mean, they got a $250 million cut, still substantial. It's the third budget where the governor has cut the UW. Governor Doyle cut the UW in a few of his budgets as well. So it's a continuation of a trend now in Wisconsin where you've seen state aid to the university. The state's share of university funding has been steadily going down as a percentage of their budget.
And what about tenure with faculty?
That 10-year provision was, the governor proposed some changes as part of his UW system authority that got scrapped by the legislature. The legislature did decide to take tenure out of state law. They left it up to the Board of Regents to have a regent policy on tenure. So they would say tenure still exists in Wisconsin. It was odd that we had tenure in state statutes. We've taken that out, and so it's not a big deal. They did, though, add provisions that would make it easier for the university to fire professors or end certain programs with really, kind of vague wording on the reasoning. They wouldn't have to. It could be a budget emergency, or it could be, kind of however they see fit. And so faculty say that makes tenure, essentially useless, to use their words, in Wisconsin. But the regents still possess the power to grant tenure, and they will.
Right. And what's the word on the street about how people felt about the UW funding and education funding in general?
Well, faculty are saying that they're going to be leaving. Some of them are saying that we're going to go elsewhere.
Some are tweeting that.
Right?
Yes.
Some are tweeting pretty, pretty bluntly that they're going to go. The university has said for a while that when stuff like this happens, it makes it harder for them to recruit and retain, personnel. But whether or not this emerges or becomes an election issue and something that the public says, wait, what are you doing here?
Right.
In a time of economic growth, we are seeing a cut to the university system. We'll find out next year if that's an issue.
Okay, and now transportation, that held up a lot of the JFC process. What was decided on transportation?
Yeah, that may have been the biggest the issue that caused the most heartburn among Republican lawmakers this time around, because the governor proposed $1.3 billion of new borrowing to pay for transportation. He asked his transportation secretary to come up with ways to fund the transportation system. He came up with a bunch of ways to do it, and essentially those were all rejected. The governor said he wasn't going to support any kind of revenue increases, whether they be tax or fee increases in this budget. And so that left lawmakers in a position where they either, if they want to reduce that borrowing, they either have to substantially cut programs, or they could have taken the rare step of trying to pass them and override a governor's veto, but they didn't want to do that. So they did end up with a substantial cut to borrowing in this, about $450 million cut to what the governor proposed.
Right.
That's a big deal. At the same time, they're still borrowing a lot of money for transportation, and long term, it doesn't exactly solve the state's woes. The amount the state pays on debt service for transportation is still going to be a record high at the end of this budget.
And the zoo interchange is going to be completed at some point?
Yeah, yes or no? I mean, the parts that are ongoing, where the construction is already happening, those got approved as part of this budget. The next phase of construction, though, that funding got delayed. So that may be something that comes up between now and then. They might try to find a way to get that funding, but that was, I think, one of the concessions that lawmakers wanted to have from outstate Wisconsin, who are seeing some of their projects get put on hold. They wanted everybody to feel some pain on this, and so that's partly why that zoo interchange delay for the second couple of years was added.
Okay. And Wisconsin residents have been complaining about potholes. We've had a couple of really rough winters. So those are going to be all filled, is that correct?
I'm not so sure about that. I'm not sure local governments would say that we have adequate funding to take care of all the potholes. That's another historic trend in Wisconsin, where you've seen state aid for local government repair of roads has been on the downward trend. Whether or not that makes a spike up, I don't see it exactly happening in this budget.
Okay. Prevailing wage.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that.
That was a big change that was added to the budget in the closing days. It was added in the Senate.
Because it was going to be used as a separate bill, separate legislation, and then all of a sudden it's back in.
Yeah, where did we go? It was going to be a separate bill, then they were going to put it in the budget because somebody wasn't going to vote for the budget without it. Then it was going to be taken out. They did put it in the budget, and so by doing that, a couple of the legislators that were holdouts on this budget, Senator Dewey Strobel, Senator Steve Nass, who, especially Senator Nass, I think everybody thought he was going to vote against this budget.
Yes. They
They added this repeal of prevailing wage for local government construction projects to the budget, and they got Senator Nass's vote. They got Senator Strobel's vote. In the end, they only lost one Republican vote for the budget itself. So a big policy change that was added to the budget at the last minute, and this is something where the governor was kind of lukewarm on it while it was being discussed, basically leaving it to the legislature to decide what they wanted to do.
Yes.
Now that it's in the budget, now that he signed it, now that it's state law, it's something that he touted when he was at his signing ceremony, that this would save local governments money.
And what does it really do? Can you explain briefly what does this part of the budget do?
The prevailing wage, essentially prevailing wage sets a base wage for government construction projects.
Right.
And what it can practically do is make sure that even non-union construction workers are making a union wage because of the way that the survey works. You take this out, it's a pretty big hit for unions. The same coalition of unions and contractors who were fighting unsuccessfully against right to work earlier this session, they lost again on this one because this is a big step. It's not the kind of baby steps that were being talked about earlier in the process. Local governments like it because they feel like it will save them money.
Right.
If you're going to save that money, it's coming from somewhere, and it's going to be wages.
Right. And then the last thing we should talk about, well, there's two things actually. Natural resources, how did they fare in the budget?
Yeah, natural resources, the legislature basically restored the stewardship program. The governor would have had effectively frozen new stewardship purchases for, I think, 13 years. And so the legislature and the Joint Finance Committee, Republican lawmakers, restored that. So stewardship did pretty well.
Okay.
As far as other natural resources changes go, the cuts to the DNR scientist position, those stayed in. The legislature agreed with those, and that's
That was
in the
pretty
final budget.
controversial.
Pretty
Yes,
controversial.
yeah.
The changes to the state parks. The governor proposed ending state taxpayer funding for Wisconsin state parks. That survived. The change that the legislature did make is they increased some camping fees
Right.
and other fees to boost funding somewhat to state parks, but it won't make up completely for the state funding, the state tax funding that they lost.
Okay, and lastly, the long-term care in the IRIS program. How did that get affected in the budget?
Yeah, that is, I mean, the governor proposed some substantial changes to long-term care that caught, I think, a lot of the advocacy groups and people who use these programs, I shouldn't say a lot, caught them all by surprise.
The hearings were very compelling.
They
when
were.
Came
I
out
think
in droves.
when you think about those budget hearings, one of the two issues that come to mind, I'd say probably public school funding
Right.
and the IRIS changes and the family care changes.
There were some
People
powerful
showing
stories.
up. I mean, the rooms were filled with wheelchairs,
Yes.
family members, and caregivers there to talk about this, and you know, in tears sometimes. The budget is different than the legislature proposed in that the legislature said, okay, when you develop this new system for long-term care, we need you to have something that's basically identical to what IRIS is doing right now. What advocates don't like, though, is that we are still shifting to a system that's going to be run by a for-profit HMO, and through the governor's budget vetoes at the end, it's still going to be a statewide system instead of a regional system. They don't like that because they feel like they're not going to get the same kind of attention and have the same kind of freedom that they do right now.
Right. Okay. Well, so what are some of the things you think that are going to affect Wisconsin residents directly out of this budget? What changes are average Joe? What are they going to see from this budget?
Well, let's see. I think the governor would say you're going to see lower property taxes again. Okay. That is his number one pitch on this budget from the day he introduced it to the day he signed it. Property taxes are going to go down under this budget again on the median value home in Wisconsin. Now, are they going to go down substantially? No, they are not. I mean, Republican lawmakers are describing it. Some of them are saying it's really more keeping property taxes flat, maybe not wanting to oversell it.
Yes.
Because I think the Fiscal Bureau said, at least the memo earlier in this session said that they were going to go down $11 over 2 years on the median value home. So you might not notice that on your tax bill, but you're not going to see, on the median value home anyway, not going to see your taxes go up. So that's what the governor's going to be talking about. If you camp, if you like these state parks, if you go to those, you'll see your fees go up for those. That's one of those tangible, noticeable changes.
There goes your $11. It'll go for your camping fees.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. I always wonder whether what's the average person sees when it comes to public schools or the university, because I think that's going to be a big part of the Democrats' pitch in the next election cycle. Here we are in this time of economic growth, and the governors and Republicans are cutting higher education funding. There's no new money for schools. You're going to have a lot of schools going to referendum again to keep operating. If your school has to go to referendum to keep operating, you're going to notice that.
Well, that's what we'll just talk about the budget.
All right,
we'll put that
leave
to
it
bed. Now we go to the Bucks Arena, and that was a nail biter.
That was in the budget.
It was. I know.
Remember
it was
those
in
days?
yes.
Yeah.
And then it got pulled out.
Right.
Why did it get pulled out?
They didn't think they could get the votes if it was in the budget. Look, they
Yeah.
needed to get Democratic votes for this bill.
Yeah.
No Democrat was going to vote for that budget.
Yeah.
So they pulled it out, and they got all the Democratic votes they wanted and then some.
Right. It ended up 21-10.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
This is, for people who were thinking maybe this will be like the Miller Park vote, where they had to vote 3 times on the last night, and the final vote came at 5 in the morning, and there was just one vote, and the senator George Petak had to switch his vote, and he got recalled. All that high drama with the Miller Park vote that was not in the building.
This just slid right through.
21-10 is huge.
It was amazing. So what were the back deals going on? The back room deals with the cigars and the I don't know if it's like that anymore.
No cigars anymore.
No, I
in the
know,
state
no
capitol.
smoking.
It was all about picking up these Democratic votes, and so one of the things that Milwaukee Democrats insisted on, Chris Larson, Senator Chris Larson in particular, was he wanted to get rid of this provision that let Milwaukee County finance its share of the Bucks deal by collecting all this currently uncollected debt or unpaid taxes that the county currently can't go after or has had no success going after.
Right.
Chris Larson said that was heartless, that it amounted to financing a stadium on the backs of poor people, the people who can least afford it. He insisted on getting that out. Once that was out, he said, "I'm a yes vote." I mean, it was just like that. Once that was in there, he said he was on board. He wanted to see the Bucks stay. The other big change, and these aren't the only ones, but the other big change was a $2 ticket surcharge was added in
And that was
the package.
Senator Carpenter wanted that early on, I believe, didn't he?
Senator Carpenter said that was kind of paltry. I mean, he voted against this, so that did not get Senator Carpenter on board. He also didn't like the way that it was structured. That $2 ticket surcharge will be paid by Joe Schmo in the cheap seats. It'll also be paid by somebody who's courtside, paid who knows how much for their tickets. It's $2 for everybody.
Right.
The way that was set up, 50 cents of that $2 will go to state government.
Okay.
Won't reduce state government's contribution to this arena. We're not paying less for the arena. It's essentially a 50 cent per ticket tax that goes to the general fund. The other $1.50 of that will go to the Wisconsin Center District, which has really the most financial liability in all this. The Wisconsin Center District is currently is paying for a convention center in Milwaukee. It's not going to be able to pay down, as the original deal was struck, wasn't going to be able to pay down any of the debt for this Bucks arena for 13 years, and so it would have been accumulating interest over that time, and that drove the interest costs up. So that ticket surcharge will reduce that interest somewhat. I think Senator Taylor said on the floor it was in the neighborhood of $30 million, but when you consider the entire Bucks deal between the state, city, county, Wisconsin Center District, the entire cost with interest is closer to $400 million over 20 years. It's not a huge reduction.
So what about the luxury boxes? They're just paying that $2 surcharge as well?
I'm not sure how that works
out
out actually, or if they will pay the $2 surcharge. I just am not sure as we sit here right now.
And does this ensure that it has to go to the assembly?
Yes.
And then if it passes there, well, what are the chances of that? I think that they have the votes there, correct?
I think so.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see if Democrats there insist on any new changes.
Yeah.
Speaker Voss has said he needs up to 15 Democratic votes to pass it there.
It does. Okay.
That could be
Interesting.
that could be hedging, that could be negotiations. I mean, he has a 63-seat majority over there, which would mean a lot of his members are voting no on this.
Yeah.
Or he wants his vulnerable members to vote no on this. But we don't know what the final product's going to look like, but I would expect it's going to pass there.
When are they coming to the floor with this?
We don't know.
We don't know.
No.
You're trying to plan a vacation. This is not easy.
I think I think they're on vacation, some of their members, and so it's going to be not next week, maybe the week after is what it was sounding like.
And if it passes the assembly and it goes through, does this ensure that the Bucks will stay in Milwaukee?
Pretty sure, yeah. They said that if this deal, which is now undergone changes, but at their little, you call it informational/promotional hearing before the legislature, if this is becomes law, they're going to stay in Wisconsin. Now, a couple decades from now, we'll be having this same discussion probably because that's the way professional sports works. But for the time being, they are the Milwaukee Bucks if this becomes law.
All right. Let's move on to, on Monday, a big surprise. Governor Walker announced he was going to run for president.
What?
News to you.
I know, yeah.
Wow, I was just shocked.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you covered that.
Yes.
And were there surprises? Tell me about the stump speech. And
all anyone remembers from that is that the heating and cooling is just not up to par in the Waukesha County Expo Center. It was very warm.
I didn't
the
know
governor
that.
was very warm.
Oh. I did hear something
everybody.
about
It was just an oven in there.
Oh, dear.
But he spoke for, I think, in the neighborhood of a half hour.
No teleprompter, no
teleprompter.
notes.
Yeah, and this is something that Republicans really made a point of. Like, look, you don't have to have a teleprompter. I mean, it's a dig at President Obama, who
Yes.
uses the
Yeah,
teleprompter
he does.
at all these events. You don't have to do that. Look at Scott Walker here, just speaking off the cuff. It should be noted, though, that he has given that speech quite a few times in some form.
Yes,
I mean,
so
especially
many
when-
times that Jimmy Fallon has taken the clips and puts them and they're in sequence together and they're in harmony.
It almost,
Like,
yes,
it's
perfect.
amazing.
The pitch, the timing, everything, the cadence.
He's got it down.
Yes,
The machine.
He's done that Coles curve
The
speech
Coles bucks and
a few
scooping in her
times.
purse and stuff.
Right,
Yeah, it's
yeah.
amazing.
But still, I think a pretty fired up crowd for some of the lines in there. And as far as new material goes, maybe you didn't hear a lot, but you did hear the governor stress. And I think this is the message he wanted people to take away, is that he will be a fighter, but not only a fighter who will win. That's kind of his basic pitch, is that, look, you have fighters in this race, but they haven't done anything. You got people who've never taken a stand, but they win elections. I'm both. I fight, I win. And that was the point that he kind of drilled home at the end of the speech there on a variety of topics.
And a little more international, of course, because
He did,
I talked about Russia and the Ukraine, and
Yeah.
so now he's on his tour.
Yes.
And how is that? How is he playing outside of Wisconsin?
It looks like, just from what you see on social media, it looks like he's playing to packed houses right now.
A lot of Harley
A lot of Harley,
paraphernalia around.
Yeah, he wants to emphasize, look,
Yes.
I'm a Harley guy. I'm just like you, going to a lot of barbecues and South Carolina, moving on out to diners in New Hampshire.
Right.
He will be in Iowa, making a lot of stops in Iowa.
In the Winnebago.
This
He's
weekend.
getting in the Winnebago.
Yeah, right. Which is a campaign bus,
Yes, yes. Well, there was another thing that came out on Thursday. The Supreme Court ruled on John Doe 2, right? It was just 2.
Yes.
Because we've had so many John Does, it's hard to keep them straight. So give me a little overview of what that ruling said and how that might affect his campaign.
Yeah, essentially what the ruling said, and it's a lengthy ruling, but you can actually get the gist of the ruling on page 1 of the decision written by Justice Michael Gableman, and he wrote for the 4 conservative justices in the 4-2 opinion. Justice Gableman and the court held that the definition of political purposes in Wisconsin is unconstitutionally overbroad and vague under the First Amendment to the United States Constitution and Wisconsin Constitution. So that definition of political purpose was the foundation of this investigation into Governor Walker's campaign and the conservative groups. I mean, they were the investigators, bipartisan DAs from 5 counties and a special prosecutor, were looking into whether Governor Walker's campaign illegally coordinated with these conservative groups. Based on that, once the court said that's unconstitutional, that law, now that we know now that we've called this law unconstitutional, these conservative groups haven't done anything wrong.
Right.
And they said, to be clear, Justice Gableman wrote, this conclusion ends the John Doe investigation. So that pretty much ends any ambiguity, and there's been a lot of it with this case. It could still be appealed.
Right.
But a pretty big ruling, and in the dissent, Justice Shirley Abrahamson called it convoluted analysis, overblown rhetoric, saying it adopts unprecedented and faulty interpretation of Wisconsin's campaign finance laws, and that within the realm of issue advocacy, the majority's opinion's theme is, quote, anything goes.
Wow.
So
Pretty powerful.
So practically, it's big. It's good for the governor.
Yes.
He's running for president. He
Yes.
had this investigation into his campaign's activities in 2012 is closed. That is good for the
Huge
governor,
for him, I
right?
would say.
I mean, there's no. I don't think there's really too much gray area on that. I mean, you still have the record of this case and of John Doe 1 that he will have to answer to.
Right.
That's still out there. That's not going away, but the investigation is closed.
Has it been that important to voters, though, do you think?
I don't know. I think it's a huge change that the court just made in Wisconsin, though, because what the court is saying, unless the legislature goes in and rewrites campaign finance laws to change this, the court is saying that a campaign could tell a big donor, look, you're limited to giving me $10,000, but you can give this group with whom I can work, you can give them unlimited funds.
Anonymously, right?
Anonymously.
You would not know who
Nobody
it is.
will know that,
Yeah.
that you gave them the money, and I'll make sure that it's well spent. They can coordinate. As long as that group doesn't say words like vote for or vote against, express advocacy,
Right.
the Supreme Court has said they can coordinate. That's a
Right.
big change, and it's going to mean a lot more dark money. It's not necessarily going to be more dark money because we already have these groups taking in huge,
Right.
huge money. What it's going to mean is they can now work with these candidates, and these candidates eventually become office holders who make decisions that affect, these big donors.
Right, right. Well, we did a very short, unscientific survey.
All right.
How do you think Governor Scott Walker will fare as candidate for president? Overwhelmingly, people think he's going to do well in Iowa and go on, but fail in subsequent primaries and caucuses. What are you hearing out there?
I think he has high expectations in Iowa because he seems like a good fit there. He is a governor from a Midwest state. He's adopting this everyman persona that seems to play well there. He hasn't emphasized it in Wisconsin in his gubernatorial runs, but his record on social issues is pretty solid for an Iowa conservative who's interested in voting on social issues. So he's got all that going for him. He's been leading the polls pretty consistently in Iowa, especially after his big speech from earlier this year. So yeah, I think you would be smart to bet on him for the Iowa caucus. Now, winning Iowa doesn't mean that you're going to go on and become the Republican nominee.
Didn't Mike Huckabee win it a few years back?
Refresh
When
my
was
memory,
that?
but like the list of people
Yeah.
who have come in,
Yeah.
who've done well in Iowa, does not correlate to the list of people who
No.
do well in New Hampshire
Yeah.
and on and
Very
on.
different. Very
I
different
don't. I mean,
voting.
personally, I don't think that he's going to just wilt like after
Right.
after Iowa. He'll have a harder time in those other states,
Right.
but fundamentally, I think he's positioned to be one of the that handful of candidates in that huge field that make a run at it.
Well, we should conclude because you're off to Iowa to
I
cover.
hope so. Yeah, I got to get all that the details ironed out. But yeah, I hope
So,
to.
and maybe you'll get some vacation time. So that ends
Eventually.
Rewind for the week of July 13th through the 17th. Thanks, Shawn.
Thank you.